back. WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive, the Maryland Crab Cake Tour, continuing on here. Wins, losses, doesn't matter. I'm going to drink beer, eat crab cakes throughout the fall. Probably get some big fat crabs here before it's all over with because October is good for that around here. But, 3-1 sounds delightful. 4-0 would sound incredible and almost unprecedented. 2-2 right now, middle of the pack. Luke Jones joins us. He, of course, will be in Owings Mills as the sole representative of all things WNST and Baltimore Positive in asking questions about Marcus Peters and John Harbaugh and the defense and who's coming back off the end. Where's Ronnie Stanley again on the injury report? Luke, I'll say this, at 2-2 and these meltdowns and the 3 touchdowns, we have all this drama going on around here. Your brother-in-law is real pleased with himself up in Philadelphia right now, right? I mean, even the Cowboy fans are feeling good about themselves. The Commanders, they're on their 3rd name. They still have the same owner as last I checked, and they stink. And, I mean, there's really some separations for teams that stink, right? Like the Raiders have pulled themselves out of the abyss at this point. But I don't know where there's a team more disappointing than the Baltimore Ravens are right now at 2-2.
Yeah, I mean, let's also mention the Steelers are 1-3, which, even though Ben Roethlisberger still feels a little strange, right?
You know what I want to say about that? Let me be flippant. It's about time. It's about time that you losers lose.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Is that better?
But, sure.
Made me feel better.
I think you look at this thing. I mean, you mentioned Philadelphia. I mean, boy, kind of the anti-Ravens on Sunday, right? They fall behind to Jacksonville, who, by the way, I still think Jacksonville's decent.
Everybody thinks Jacksonville's decent.
I really do. And it's not just, you look at how they got off to a decent start compared to, seeing this team just be the perennial 1-3, 2-6, 3-11 when they get to December. But analytically, they kind of stack up pretty well too. So, but Philadelphia falls behind, miserable conditions there, and they crawl their way out of it, unlike the Ravens, who are jumping out ahead of teams, and you're thinking, wow, it's party time. And, well, we see what the second half looks like compared to the first. So, it's still very early. And that's where I will, after beating them up for our previous segments, they're 2-2. They're not 0-4. Yeah, it'd be a hell of a lot better if they're 4-0 right now. But everything's still in front of them. This is not an AFC North where anyone's out to a 4-0 start. I mean, Cincinnati had to crawl out of an 0-2 hole. The Bengals are looking better, but they still have their issues, which I think their head coach is one of them, with some of their play calling leaving a lot to be desired relative to the talent that they have on the offensive side of the ball. But their defense is playing well. It's going to be a heck of a challenge on Sunday night. And I saw the Ravens are favored. I guess, 3 points for the home team. I understand, but boy, they've got
Vegas knew that Harbaugh wasn't going to go for it there. I mean, Vegas knew this thing was 3 points,
Right. There you go. But, I mean, Cleveland, they choke away, lose a game to Atlanta, and we talked about the Steelers. So, I mean, the AFC North, let's face it, it's mediocre right now. As much as, the reputation, was a little more favorable, although, the Deshaun Watson thing and Pittsburgh not having a quarterback, certainly made those 2 teams look lesser than the Ravens and the Bengals. But we'll see what happens on Sunday night. But, plenty of interesting things going on. And as you mentioned, there's some very clearly some teams that are lacking and some teams that are surprising right now. It's, kind of what you expect early in the season, right? You expect the unexpected, right? I mean, that's just how it works. I mean, we know that there are going to be some teams that disappoint, and there are going to be a couple teams that come out of nowhere. And, right now at 2-2 for the Ravens, I mean, you just look around, and if the season were to end today, based on early Monday morning, standings, they'd be the final wild card with taking into account tiebreakers and everything. Who cares? It's early October, but it is a reminder.
Boy, you are sunshine today, Luke John. I'm gonna call you Sunshine Luke.
No. Well, I was actually saying that in a way to take a deep breath. Playoff positioning doesn't matter now, but they actually would be the final wild card team. But it's a reminder that, hey, as lousy as you feel Sunday night, as lousy as they felt 2 weeks ago, and I think it's going to be interesting. How do you react to this? I think you don't want to overreact, but I also don't think the mindset of saying, well, they're only a couple plays away from being 4-0. If the team's thinking that way, then I do have concerns. I want this football team, this coaching staff, these players to feel some urgency right now. But acknowledging that they're 2-2, long way to go. As you mentioned in a previous piece, some very winnable games coming up. The Sunday notwithstanding, Sunday night. But they've got to get themselves in order. But there are lots of teams saying that. And you look at the AFC right now. Buffalo, they lost in Miami. The Dolphins, they're an absolute mess, beyond what we've seen on the football field. And the Kansas City Chiefs, who looked very impressive on Sunday Night Football. I mean, Patrick Mahomes, that goal line touchdown flip, that was like something out of the Harlem Globetrotters, wasn't it? They're 3-1, but even their one loss, they lost to Indianapolis, where you just kind of scratch your head at how that happened. So there are no perfect teams, other than, I guess, Philadelphia being undefeated. So lots of football to go, lots of figuring out to go. And I think the Ravens are not a bad team by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly have some work to do before we start looking at them as a serious top tier kind of contender in the AFC, based on what we've seen 2 of the last 3 weeks.
He's Luke Jones. He will be in Owings Mills all week long, trying to get ready for the Cincinnati Bengals. You mentioned being favorites, underdog. Dude, I know you're at the games, and it's different for me this year. I'm watching on TV, right? So I get to sit here and watch every gambling ad. It reminds me of when the little blue pill came along about 20 years ago too, right? Like every ad, every single ad, probably made a lot more babies back then. I don't know what we're making now. Probably more gambling addicts at this point. I don't know. I've never thought about sports in that way. It's not my DNA. I will say this. I mean, I spent the 90s and the early part of this on Fridays doing nothing but picking games and talking about who could win by 3, who could win by 4, who was 7 points better. I haven't talked about the game, and you and I have known each other a decade and a half. Feels like I've known you my whole life. I don't know that you and I have ever sat here and talked about point spreads or who's a favorite or who's behind, and how the Ravens weirdly pushed on Sunday, where 98% of the coaches in the history of the game would have kicked a field goal down there. And we talked about that for an hour, right? But the notion that the Bengals are going to come in here and be the underdog, like that's interesting to me, philosophically where all of this goes. Because I always think with the gambling thing, like the Thursday night game last week, I thought Dolphins are going to go to Cincinnati. Yeah, they're going to 4-0. Sure they are, right? I thought that's the play of the week, playing the Bengals. And then Tua gets hit in the head, and all the awful stuff happens at that point. And I'm thinking, some of these games feel easy to me. But when you start to tell me that the Bengals have been installed as an underdog here, I scratch my head a little bit, because I wonder, how are they going to stop the back end of the back? Like the Bengals were a better team most of last year. Say what you want about them the first month of the season, but that's an interesting thing for me. And the Bengals are a really interesting team to me in this conference, in this division. Overlooked. They're the Bengals. They're always the Bengals. Dude, I sat on the roof in LA 8 months ago, and I swear to God, I thought they were going to win. All their fans were on my side. And they were nuts in Zubaz and all crazed up, jungled up and all that. And I've been going to Cincinnati for 26 years, on and off, having chili and heartburn and indigestion. This Bengals team's the Browns are awful, okay? Steelers, they can't win somebody's got to win the division, right? This, for all the mistakes and the 3 touchdowns this week, last week, if you take care of the Bengals, you at least get to play in January, right? Like, and I talked earlier about this. If you look over the hill here, and it's hard to do, not knowing who our linebackers are going to be or who the left tackle is going to be. And Ronnie Stanley's on the maybe list again this week, right? I guess. And then when he comes back, he's a maybe, right? I look at the Bengals and I say, as bad as the sky is falling, and you look at the schedule, this is the most important game they're going to play the next month or two. I mean, really, for them, because it's a one-team race to some degree. And I'm not saying they're going to roll over the Steelers twice or roll over the Browns, because it never works that way in the division. But the Steelers and the Browns can't win the division. Are we in agreement on that, or no?
I wouldn't think so. I mean, Pittsburgh, unless Pickett is more like a rookie Ben Roethlisberger than anyone thinks, and I don't think that. Let's be very clear. I'd say no. And I mean, the Browns, they've got a lot of talent, but Jacoby Brissett's not Deshaun Watson, putting aside the character and off-field impact. He's not the same caliber of a quarterback on paper. And you just, now with Myles Garrett, with him being banged up with just a horrific car accident. I mean, guy's lucky he didn't lose his life based on, the photo of what the car looked like. But yeah, I've always felt this was a two-team race. And, from the moment we knew Deshaun Watson was going to miss at least a very sizable portion of the season, it was going to be the Ravens and the Bengals or the Ravens. I mean, take your pick, Coke or Pepsi, I think for a lot of people going into the season in that regard. So that's where you do look at this game on Sunday night. And let's face it, you need to hold serve on your home field. And again, that is what makes two of these last three games that frustrating. These two back-to-back home collapses are just, that's not supposed to happen in Baltimore. As I mentioned, blowing 17-point leads and losing had only happened 3 other times in franchise history before September 18th. And now it's happened twice in 3 weeks. So you better hold serve against Cincinnati, because if you lose, and look, you lose, you go to 2-3, Cincinnati's 3-2. That's not insurmountable. However, long season to navigate. And then you remind yourself that you go to Cincinnati week 18 on either January 7th or January 8th, and that's for the division. And you don't want to be in a bind already at that point. So, it's a big game. It's as big as week 5 can be. How about we put it that way? It's not season ending or season making by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a really important football game. This is the team you expect to be jockeying with for the division. And right now they're both 2-2. And let's face it, Bengals got off to a really choppy start. You mentioned the Steelers, and we kind of poked fun at the fact that they're not good. Bengals lost to them in week 1. The Bengals lost to the Cowboys in week 2 without Dak Prescott. So it's not as though they haven't shown their flaws. In fact, I think their offense has left something to be desired despite the weapons that they have. And that's why I mentioned Zach Taylor and not being enamored with their play calling. What I do think is interesting is their defense, which we saw that defense rise to the occasion and down the stretch last year, and the way they played in the postseason, specifically how they played Kansas City in the second half of that AFC Championship game. That defense is pretty good, and they've done a nice job against the Ravens. Going back to last year, not even talking about the second game as much, Josh Johnson, but what they did against the Ravens early last season in Baltimore. That's where I look at this thing and say, this offense needs to be on point. And you hope the defense can do a way better job on Jamar Chase and company than they did last year. So it's a big game. There's no question about it. And it's not, like I said, season altering, season ending, season making. That would be way too dramatic, but you absolutely want to hold serve at home because you're going to Cincinnati in week 18, and it's a pretty good chance a division could be on the line in that one if this season plays out in the way we expect it to as we're now into the second week of October.
It's fun, isn't it? Huh? Football
Absolutely.
season, huh? This beats the other, 38 weeks of sitting around here and waiting for the games to begin, right? But, the Marcus Peters, John Harbaugh squaring off at the end. I had some people in the media that I know think that maybe he was mad at Owa or Owe. I don't. It felt like it was John. I mean, and it also feels like that was a little over the top demonstrative, wouldn't you say? And I know you'd say, well, Marcus Peters runs hot.
Yeah.
That's that was unprofessional, whatever you want to call it, your anger, take that into the locker room, whatever. But doing that out in the middle of the field for the cameras, for the world to see, I haven't seen many people disrespect John Harbaugh publicly, right? You know what I mean? In that sort of a way, I think you can calm that down, cool that down, whatever, but I don't know that you can make it stop. And they're going to lose more football games this year. You know what I mean? They're going to lose again.
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, I don't expect them to go 15-2. That's for sure. I didn't expect that before the season started. I didn't expect that before they blow 3 possession leads and lose 2 home games. This is, but I'll say this much, Nestor. This is where all that talk about we love our culture and we play like Ravens here and we're together and we've got a great locker room. This test that. Anyone is capable of losing their cool at some point in time. And that's not to excuse the behavior, but it's happened before. We've seen players and coaches need to be restrained. We've seen coaches and coaches need to be restrained. We've seen these types of things happen over the years.
I saw Kevin Gilbride and Buddy Ryan.
Right, exactly. But the key here is, do you squash it and your culture allows that to not be an issue? Or is that the sign of some systemic issues here? We talked about, there's systemic issues that we're seeing at the end of football games. Some of the things we saw at the end of last year, 2-point failures and things of that nature have carried over, right? We're seeing the same thing. It wasn't a 2-point try on Sunday, but the point is it was at the 2-yard line and they went for it rather than kick. So it's very similar in that way. So again, as I mentioned, and I'm not condoning being so ticked off that you need to be restrained from your head coach, but I do want guys to be a little ticked off about this. Guys should be a little embarrassed about this. I mean, think about the tradition of the Baltimore Ravens playing downtown, playing in Baltimore, their home record going back to the late 90s. I mean, we saw this kind of turn in 1999, right? Late in the season. I mean, this is a team that has been one of the very best in the NFL at home for over 2 decades now. And to not just lose those games, look, you lose by a score to the Miami Dolphins.
They're so disrespected that Vegas thought they were going to lose at home. Like literally, like they're now an underdog. I mean, the mystique is over. The mystique of Ray Lewis, and you're going to come in here and you're going to get 3 points because it's Baltimore. That doesn't exist anymore. I guess.
Well, let's be clear. Buffalo was the overwhelming Super Bowl favorite. Let's not. I mean, Miami. Okay, there was question. Tua and all that. They've looked really good so far, but Buffalo was hands down the very clear-cut Super Bowl favorite in the eyes of just about everyone. I mean, yeah, pundits will pick some team different just to be, different and distinctive. But, you look at the numbers, overwhelmingly Buffalo was the pick, right? So, from that standpoint, it's not shocking. What is shocking is not losing these games by 1 score. If someone told you going into that week 2 game that they lose to Miami, okay, fine. I'm guessing what happened in terms of Miami having a really good day at throwing the football is that would cause a loss. However, it's the way in which they're losing these. Same with Buffalo. I picked the Ravens to win 24-23. It was 23-20 Buffalo. That's not terribly different, especially in lousy elements, which you and I haven't talked about a whole lot. That's something else. Quietly, the Ravens haven't played very well, and Lamar Jackson hasn't played very well in some of these rainy, windy games. You kind of have to go back to that San Francisco game 3 years ago where they got it done. So there's that. Again, the end result isn't even as much the issue for me as it is. You got 3-score leads at home, and I mean, Tua and the Dolphins embarrassed them in the 4th quarter. This wasn't the same egregious collapse that was, but boy, you'd like to think you learned a lesson, and you didn't. So that's where you look at this thing, and that's where the Marcus Peters anger. I want some other guys to be ticked off. I want some guys to feel some urgency. I want some guys to feel embarrassed, quite frankly, because as you said, that's not supposed to happen in Baltimore. There were 3 examples of it over their first 26 seasons where that had happened. And now it's happened twice in 3 weeks. I mean, that's below the bar, as John Harbaugh likes to say. So we'll have to see how they respond. And certainly it's going to be a big test with the Bengals coming to town on Sunday night.
Luke Jones is here. He will be there in Owings Mills all week long. And, now that this Orioles thing's over, I know you can fully focus on football. Anything you want to say in the aftermath of an above 500 season, which we all get to share the meme that we're not losers and all of that. We'll get at it, and I'd love to get at it about the fence going back and where they are and where John Means is and where they would be healthy on April 1st of next year, which isn't that far off, but it's 6 months. We got a couple of weeks of baseball playoff activity and weird playoffs and different format that the old guys like me who had to learn the DH at one point in interleague play now have to learn the new format here. And the Seattle Mariners are in, and that was incredibly exciting to see that. My boy Dave Sims on the call. But the baseball season ending, the full focus on football, but it's not full. I mean, like, the baseball off season should be interesting no matter what the Ravens do the next 10 weeks.
Yeah, it better be, right? Because this was a really fun season. I mean, Nestor, think about it. I picked the Ravens to go, or the Orioles to go 65 and 97. I posted in my 12 Orioles thoughts.
What are you, Buster Olney, Mr. Negative?
No, quite the contrary. I had some people saying that was too optimistic, that they weren't going to lose 100 games. So it just speaks,
one of them. I mean, I looked at their roster and I think, how are they going to win?
It speaks to how fun this season really was. Think about it. They were mathematically in it until 12:30 a.m. Eastern time on October 1st. I mean, my goodness, just stop right there. And you know what?
That's a lot different than Robert Andino beating the Red Sox in the rain in the middle of the night and eliminating them. That's a different game we're playing when you're still in it.
Yeah, and I will say, keep in mind that 2011 moment, very much, I absolutely believe that was a precursor to what we saw the following season, because they played some decent ball.
But the fans here haven't had a magic number they didn't make. Right? Like the Orioles made the playoffs in the years they should have. They haven't been at the gate with their nose pressed to the glass. Back in the 70s, it happened all the time, right? Mm-hmm. With the Yankees and winning all those games in 1980 and not getting it. Like, I remember that, but when there were two teams in, it was the Yankees and the Royals, right? This was a different chase out of nowhere, dog chasing the car, and finally at the end, the car winning, right? But this is a different feeling, I think, for the fans than I've experienced on radio all these years. They've never come close to making the playoffs and the Bum Phillips were going to kick the door in. This is the first time that feels that way to me. Not of getting eliminated or Delman Young or the Royals thing that you and I experienced feels like 5 minutes ago, and it's been almost a decade, Luke, right? I got gray hair and longer. But I remember the pain of being at Royal Stadium with you that night, Kauffman Stadium, and watching the Royals get excited. We've had a little bit of that, but this nose pressed up to the glass, and we're young and we have potential. I don't know where they are in money. I don't know where they are in and clearly it's a shit show. I mean, you met the family was in court in Towson 5 days ago, right? They're all going to fight all off season. So I don't know what it's not well run, despite what Don Moeller might think of Mike Elias. I've met TJ Brightman. It's not well run at all. So this is where we talk about the Ravens being well run and John knowing what he's doing and having a pelt on the wall and like all of that. Can they get up and walk? This is uncharted territory for the Orioles. Even if Mike Elias knows what he's doing and identifies that free agent he wants, This is where the Orioles need real reporters, really, to figure out what's going on down there.
Well, I'll disagree with you with one aspect. I think the baseball ops side is being well run now. However, we know that can't be completely separated from the business side when it comes to the point where you're in a position where the Orioles are in now, where, all right, you have Adley Rutschman, who looks like he's going to be a perennial all-star. You have Gunnar Henderson, who looks like he could be the same. I mean, these are kids who look like they could be MVP candidates in their best years. That's how good they are. They're a little bit different than.
But this is sort of pre-Cubby in that way, right? Where the Cubs went out and got. I mean,
well, but that's my point, right?
The Phillies went out and got when they won. These teams that have won, right?
Right. My point is, you have a base in place here, and you have more guys on the way. And we'll see if Grayson Rodriguez gets a start here in the final series or not. It doesn't sound like it's an absolute no or an absolute yes.
What difference does it make as long as he doesn't get hurt?
Well, I'd sure like to see him, but your point is well taken. You want him to be healthy, and he's healthy. So, you have that. But the point is, you have a base, you have more guys coming in, you've got a lot of young players, but they're not there yet. They need to augment, whether that means you're going to trade some of your pieces in the minor league system for a number one starter or number two starter, whether that means you're going to go out and get that, whether that means you're going to go out and get a bat. And that's where we come back to the business and the financial side and the stability or lack thereof of ownership.
And who. It's always a who. It's a person. Well, you got to call Mr. Big to loosen up the money. Who's Mr. Big? Mrs. Big, Mama Big,
sure,
Baby Big, Fredo big. I don't, but I don't think any of them have a clue as to what they're doing or any strategy other than getting out of bed tomorrow and fighting with each other. Like literally, right? That's the way it looks to me. Like when it comes down to where are the big strategy decisions for the future of the team, including signing this mystical lease that everybody over at Jimmy's Seafood and Dundalk's all worked up about. I'll believe the lease when I see the lease. I'll believe true competence when I see true competence. I am very convinced Mike Elias can take dough and make donuts. I'm convinced of that. I'm not convinced that they want to play big boy baseball and have $150 million payroll again and get serious about this and how that's going to happen and where the funding comes, where the sales come, where the fan experience, like all of that and the lease and whatever casino they're going to build out. So like all of that. This is up to the mind of John Angelos right now fighting with Lou. I mean, and I've gone back to the beginning with this for 31 years now as to this is where things get hairy. This is where things get a little sticky. Just like, oh, we love Lamar. Let's draft Lamar. We believe in Lamar. Nobody believed in Lamar. Look at Lamar. Lamar's great. Lamar wants what? Guaranteed? Like we're getting closer to that with the Orioles than you believe, right? Like literally, it feels early, but early comes late. If you only win 87 games and you take a 3-game facer next year and you're good, but you're not that good. And you had the ability to go get the Scherzer or the Verlander
Sure.
or whatever, whoever that is. That I don't know enough about it. This is why they pay Mike Elias. But when Mike Elias goes in and says, I need $28 million for a pitcher next year, Mama Angelos might cough and say, but we're trying to sell the team. I have no idea how that works, but I do know they probably need some help. They probably can't come back with John Means and Grayson Rodriguez and think they're going to win 101 games next year, right?
Yeah, I completely agree with that sentiment. They need to augment. And, to your point, it doesn't even have to be a $150 million payroll in one offseason, mind you, because the payroll is so low at where it is that they could spend some pretty significant dough.
You better put Rutschman in for $25 million in 26 and 27, right?
Like I don't care about 26 and 27 right now. I hear you, but you're talking about next year, right? There you would like to think, and if there isn't, then boy, everything you just mentioned becomes so much more magnified. You'd like to think there are some very legitimate resources available. Again, that doesn't mean they go up to $170 million payroll. I don't, even with a blank checks, I don't know if they could get that high in one off season, practically speaking. And, it'd kind of be like, someone gives you $10 million, how quickly could you spend it? In just your personal life, it would take a little while, right?
I'll give you 2 words, Ubaldo Jimenez.
Right. Sure. Well, and that's part of it too. Let's be clear about this. I don't want this to be that you go out and sign Ubaldo Jimenez in some other form, right? You want to make smart decisions. And that's a big part of Mike Elias here. Whether it's via trade or free agency, you'd like to get number 1 starter, number 2 starter, someone that fits into the top of your rotation, right? Whether he's going to be the ace or whether he's number 2 and, John Means comes back in June and is great, or Grayson Rodriguez is rookie of the year, however it plays out, you'd like that. And for me, Jordan Lyles, they have an $11 million option on. I'd like to upgrade with someone. I'd much rather pay someone else to be a back half of the rotation guy for maybe 13 million as opposed to 11, in the case of Lyles. But the point is, to me, you need 2 starting pitchers to kind of fit in there. And again, one could come via trade, one could come via free agent signing. There are different ways to do this. It doesn't mean that you just have to spend money like it's going out of style, but you want to have resources available to make augmentate. You want to augment what you have. It's good, to your point, and I wholeheartedly agree. If it's just largely standing pat, I don't know if that's going to land them in the postseason next year. So they have work to do, and that's a good thing, by the way. We're talking about this. We're looking at this through a different lens. This isn't, how do they, be less lousy than they were the year before, which is kind of, what we, in the way we've talked about them the last few years. Now it's, hey, you've had a winning season. You've been so much better than everyone expected. How do you take the next step? Because we also know, and I think the Astros are a great example of this. Look what they did in 2015, but then look at 16. They didn't win the World Series the next year. They got off to a slow start, and you kind of saw how it happened. And it wasn't until the following year, cheating and banging trash cans and all that aside, but it wasn't until the following year that they took that next step. So just because the Orioles are in this position where, they had a winning season, and that doesn't mean that they're destined to be 15 games better next year. They can be, but I think some work has to be done in order to do that. And again, that's where we come back to, I think there are resources that will be available, but what do those resources look like? Is it going to be a lot, or is it going to be a much more modest increase in payroll? So, the time will tell. And as you mentioned, ownership, the business side, all of that, those are fair questions. Those are fair concerns to go with what is a lot of optimism on the baseball side, because, Adley Rutschman and Gunnar Henderson, they're different. I mean, these guys are different. Say what you want, Mountcastle, Hayes, Cedric Mullins, guys that have, give them credit, guys that have gotten them to this point. But Rutschman and Henderson, they're a different breed. They look like guys that can be MVP candidates. They look like guys that are going to be all-stars every year, not just solid to good ball players. So, we'll see if there are a couple more guys like that in the system, and certainly there are plenty of other guys to be monitoring, and guys that will be here next year, guys that have a chance to be on the opening day roster, certainly, and beyond just Grayson Rodriguez. So we'll see how it plays out. But I will say this, you and I taken 15 minutes to talk about the Orioles on the heels of, a awful Ravens loss, but talking about the Orioles in, I'd like to think, mostly optimistic terms, with some fair questions. Boy, that beats where they've been the last 5 years. So that alone is where I do want to give them some credit for what was a blast of a 2022 season. Just great fun, great entertainment, and very much an engaging product that we haven't seen in quite some time.
He is Luke Jones. He is a Baltimore Luke. Orioles, Ravens, more Ravens than Orioles probably this week, but we gave you a little Orioles there and a little download. I'll be writing about all of that out on my columnist. You can follow Luke's work and his good looks now out on the new platform at BaltimorePositive.com. And a big shout out to Jessica Vallis and our friends at the Hartford Design and Mike Rosenfeld, who I did a huge segment on this week about the website crash and the new resurrection and the new speed and the new server and the new host. Domestic, thank God. Had people on the phone that I could talk to in real time, not computers or bots. So all that's available at a Baltimore Positive. The Maryland Crab Cake Tour is going to roll on this week. It's all brought to you by our friends at the Maryland Lottery in conjunction with our friends at Window Nation and Goodwill. And, of course, a hot, fresh cup of coffee with Justin Tucker to begin a Monday morning. And he probably has a little time on his hands this week for not kicking the potential game winner. We'll be talking about that all week long as we get ready for the Cincinnati Bengals. I'm Nestor. He's Luke. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore Positive.